It's been about 2 weeks since this whole thing started. It all started with a tanker accident. It was all over the news. Everyone thought it was just another oil spill. There were plenty of volunteers, plenty of people wanting to help the poor defenseless animals. There were plenty of victims. Within hours of the tanker accident, it started happening. The animals had gone crazy. They were scratching and biting the cleanup volunteers. They said it was an adverse effect to whatever was in that tanker. The rescue workers were still trying to get the crew out of the ship. They could hear screaming inside. There were screams to open the doors, but that's when it all went to hell. As soon as they cut open that door, there were 6 minutes of broadcast before it went silent. 6 minutes of screaming and agony. The ship's crew attacked the rescue workers like rabid baboons. They were breaking bones and tearing flesh. The people on the shore weren't faring any better. Those that had been attacked by the animals were going after everyone else. It was worse than any war zone report I'd ever seen. It was brutality. And yet, the broadcast went on for 6 minutes. 6 minutes and then silence. Blank faces. No one could explain what was happening. They tried to continue with the regular news, the economy, the weather, human interest stories, but they couldn't make us unsee what we just saw. I tried to continue with my regular existence, but every time I switched on the news or walked by a newsstand, it was there, this big mystery. They had some explanations, like it was an infection or maybe just brain parasites or something, but it didn't matter. It wasn't the infection we were afraid of, it was them. 4 days after the initial report, a state of emergency was raised. And we've all seen this before. It's in every zombie movie. Everyone ever. People don't know who to trust. They're stockpiling food and weapons. Some try to flee, but it seems like every zombie movie was right after all. They didn't make it. And 3 days later, they arrived in my town. I expected moans and shuffling corpses and dismemberment. But that's where the movies lied. They ran through the streets screaming. I remember running to my front door as fast as I could, locking and barricading, doing everything I could to make sure it would stay shut. And then I headed for the window. It was... I was on the second story and I could see the carnage. They were unstoppable. They were actually aware. A group of them made their way through a building across the street. They jumped straight through plate glass windows. Even the shards slicing through them didn't make any difference. They just kept coming. My barricade wasn't gonna hold. I rushed around my flat, grabbing supplies and jamming them into the most secure room of the flat. I went back for one look across the street, and I wish I hadn't. In a second-story window, one of them was looking right at me. They knew where I was. I dashed into the room and I locked the door. I don't have any kind of panic room or secure basement, so the safest place I could think of was my bathroom. There were no windows and only one door out. It had a lock, but that was it. I filled my sink and my bathtub full of water so I could stay there a while. I sat there in the dark with distant screams in my ears. I began to feel like maybe I'd overreacted. It had been 2 hours and there were no sign of them. It actually got quieter. And I thought maybe they'd moved on. Maybe I could leave the room and get to the kitchen or grab some food and wait it out. And then a crash came from the front door. There was the sound of someone running full force into the door and knocking down the barrier behind it. There were a couple more crashes and Then I knew they were inside. There were rapid footsteps moving all around the flat, a couple of screams, and then a bang on the wall beside me. My eyes were open, their widest, even in the pitch-black darkness of the room. There was another bang, and then another. They knew I was in here, and they knew I'm scared. This is the zombie nightmare I'd been expecting from the start. I had nowhere to run. There was only so much time before they'd break in. I sat with my back to the door, hoping the extra weight would make it harder for them to get in. Then it got worse. There was a voice on the opposite side of the door. There were no screams or moans anymore, just a quiet, whispery voice.
Why don't you open the door?
And then more of them.
We've come for you. We'll be a lot happier if you open the door.
The whispery voices became a cacophony of noise, trying to persuade me, to break me, to fool me. This is worse than anything I would ever think of. This is like a siren call. I sat in the darkness and I hoped, I prayed they'd get bored. But they don't get bored and they don't leave. I managed to use the mirror to peek under the door, but all I saw was just their horrible unblinking eyes and blood-smeared faces, and then they started screaming and whispering again. That was 2 days ago. I don't know what to do anymore. Maybe it won't be so bad.